Welcome back to episode number 70, everybody. This is actually an interview that I did with Everyday Ultra Podcast, in which Joe, the host, is actually interviewing me. And Joe is an outstanding podcast host, let me tell you. He drew a lot of different insights from me that I haven't talked about on different podcasts before. These have to do with personal development things, growth in endurance sports and how they basically lead to growth, going through obstacles, making sure that those obstacles are in line with your goals, and if they are, how it makes it easier to go through them, and a lot of other different philosophical things, especially when it comes down to through hikes, ultra running, mountaineering objectives, anything that's really endurance based. So if you're looking for a great dose of motivation and inspiration as you are taking on a big goal in your life, I think this is going to be a great podcast to listen to. So let's get into it.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Ultra Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Corcione, and I'm pumped for this episode because I've been following this guy for a little over a year now, and I love his content. I love his mission. I love what he's doing in the endurance and the hiking community. I mean, it's just super, super cool. So he was a no-brainer to have on this show at the Everyday Ultra here. So just to give you a little bit of background from our guest today, he's a content creator, he's a thru hiker, he's an endurance athlete, and he's done tons of amazing things both online and offline on the trails. Offline on the trails, he's done tons of great thru hikes, Colorado Trail, JMT, the likes of many that you can see in his incredible videos on YouTube. He's also done a 50-mile race and a 100-mile race as well. So he is what I call one of us, our endurance junkies here, going after those big race distances. But he's also an awesome content creator. And not only does he put great content out to help you be a better endurance athlete or a hiker or whatever you kind of come from as well, but he also teaches people who want to become content creators how to monetize their passion, really do that as well. So our guest today is a Renaissance man of the outdoors, I like to call, and I'd love to introduce no other than my new friend, Chad Lubinsky, to the Everyday Ultra Podcast. Chad, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Wow. Like I said before we even started recording, man, I need you as my personal hype man because that was a amazing intro. So thank you very much for that, and I'm stoked to be here.
Appreciate it, man, dude. And that intro is well deserved. Like, I think your content has just resonated so much with me, and I know, like, even just being on this podcast and having listeners listen into, you know, your perspective and your journey, like, I know they're going to be inspired too, man. So I'm really stoked to have you on, and the honor is all mine. And before we dive into the nitty gritty of your background, your races, your hiking, how did you get into this world of, you know, not just, you know, hiking and everything, but just endurance and sports and things like that? Because it's clear to me just seeing on your content how passionate you are about this area. And I always love to see, like, how did you get here? Because I'm sure you hear this a lot too. Like, sometimes people are uncertain of how to find their passion or anything like that. So for you, like, how did you get assimilated into this world and make it such a core part of what you do?
So that's a really good question. And for a large part of my life, what I like to think now or look back on, what I was kind of directionless. Didn't really have something that I was totally passionate on. I would like bounce from thing to thing to thing. And weirdly enough, I was raised in the Midwest, and I moved to the West Coast because I wanted to be in that scene after college. And when I did that, the reason I actually moved was because I was a big hunter at the time. I was big into bow hunting in the Midwest. It was like a religion out there. Gun hunting, all of that type of stuff. And so that was like kind of what I was thinking I was going to get into. But it turns out I wasn't that good of a hunter, mostly because I wasn't that passionate about it. I think what I was more passionate about and what resonated with me a lot was following people like Cameron Hanes. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but I would love his stuff, and I would love the training aspect of it. But when it came down to like actually going into the woods and like sitting all day and like looking for I was just like, well, this is kind of boring. And I firmly remember, man, there was a time I was coming back and I was bow hunting, and I was thinking I was going to stay out there for like 4 or 5 days, and I ended up coming back within like 2 days. And I'm thinking on the whole drive home, like, what is wrong with me, man? Like, why can't I stick this out? Like, it just was not clicking for me. And I remember looking on Snapchat at the time, and one of my buddies from home, he ended up riding his bike from Madison, Wisconsin to the Wisconsin border
Oh
and
wow.
then back or something. And I remember looking at that, I'm like, how? I was like, why am I not doing something like that? Because, like, no offense to him, but I was more athletic than he was. Let's just say that. Let's just say that. He wasn't like the most athletic dude, one of my really good friends, but I'm like, why am I not doing something like that? And so, like, actually what I ended up doing, which really what changed the trajectory of my life, and it's probably an answer that you probably would be surprised to hear, is actually that night I went and signed up for a jiu-jitsu class. That was what actually ended up changing my life. And so I've always wanted to do it. I was always making excuses, but there was one like literally in the town that I was living in now. And so I ended up going to this jiu-jitsu class, and that was in 2016. And that's kind of what started to change my life right there. And so I quit drinking. I quit going out. Everything was like jiu-jitsu, jiu-jitsu, jiu-jitsu. And I was doing that for many years. And then like one summer went by and I realized I didn't do anything outdoors at all because I was just doing jiu-jitsu. And so I was like, oh, well, I got to change that, right? And what actually ended up happening is I ended up getting LASIK, which was a big part of the reason why I didn't like backpacking at the time, is because I was having to put contacts in all the time. My eyes were always dirty, and I sucked at doing that. So I got LASIK. That was another step that kind of changed my life. So now I could go backpacking. I didn't have to worry about my eyes. I didn't have to worry about contacts, getting them dirty, leaving them in, all that stuff. And so that's really what started to propel me. From there, did the JMT and all that type of stuff. But then ended up, after the JMT, how I ended up running my first ultra was I got injured in jiu-jitsu. I injured my arm. I tore my bicep. So I tore my bicep, and I was like, dang, man, I'm like in this sling, and I'm thinking, well, I can't, what am I supposed to do now? I can't do jiu-jitsu, but I still have my through hiker legs. So I'm thinking, you know what? There's this ultra in Oregon that actually David Goggins and Cam Hanes ran the year before. It was the Frozen something fest or something like that, 50K. And I was like, whatever, I'm going to do it. So I had like 3 weeks of training before it, and I was running with basically this sling on, because I couldn't do anything. But that was, my legs worked, so that was cool. And so anyway, I ended up running this 50K, loved it. And so next year I was like, okay, let's go 50 miler. And then the next year it was a 100 miler. And so now it's kind of like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I am trying to kind of figure that out in the ultra world. We do have rim to rim to rim coming up, but
nice.
Yeah, man. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it was a really good question. So I kind of wanted to give as much background as I could. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, it helps. And yeah, you're right. I didn't expect the jujitsu piece in there. And I think that's still really cool, because I've never done jujitsu personally. I know a lot of people who have done it, and I can see the similarities between through hiking and ultra running, like with jujitsu, right? Like there's so many times where you have to like think on your feet, and you have to like problem solve, and you're in these situations where you're getting potentially choked out, and you need to think fast on your feet and solve that problem in the moment to, save your match, so to say. So I can see how there's like a lot of linkage, and it's so cool to see that, one thing was taken away through injury, and it led into this whole other passion, which I think is just such a cool thing, because we can tend to, think that if we can't do one thing, then, that's kind of it, right? But you kind of pivoted on into the ultra world and stuff like that. And I know you mentioned, like, you did the 50K, you did the 50 miler, and you did the 100 miler. What are some things that you learned about yourself, like, through that progression, whether it was that first 50K or that 100 miler? Like what are some key things that like you really learned about yourself in these ultras that are super valuable, maybe useful for someone who's thinking about, diving into the world of endurance, that they can take from away as well?
Well, another great question, Joe. Thank you. I would say, as far as ultra running, man, I was just telling a friend that I was with the other day, we were rock climbing, I think, and I said an ultra is kind of like, especially a 100 miler, is like your life in a day type of thing, right? Where it's, I mean, you go through the whole day. I mean, it's morning, afternoon, night, next morning, right? But the most interesting, there's a couple really interesting things that I've learned from ultras, and it would be, number one, it's a total roller coaster. So it's always up and down and up and down and up and down. And this was highlighted really, really well in Sally, and I've seen you interviewed Sally McRae, her recent interview or her recent run with Cocodona, that documentary, is so good because you see these light and dark moments of her going up and down and up and down and roller coaster, roller coaster, roller coaster. And that's an ultra. And
Mhm.
it's the same with through hiking because there's, you just have to get through those really, really bad moments. And there's always going to be some, you're going to get, if you just concentrate enough and you keep going through that moment, you will get through it, and there you will be able to get energy from something else. But you have to go through it, and a lot of people will quit at those down moments, and like that's like the place that I will not quit because
Mhm.
I know that there's going to be another one coming up. The only, and I don't quit things, but when I realize I'm not into something is when I'm like having a great day in it and it's still not really resonating with me.
Mhm.
And so maybe that would be like an example of like how I was with hunting and stuff like that. Like it just wasn't like, it wasn't giving me that feeling. And so if you, and it's so anyway, so the roller coaster is a great analogy for life. It's a great analogy for business because it's the same with business. Like, I quit my job in January. Now it's like I'm working with clients and stuff like that. And some months it's really good. And some weeks it's really good. And some weeks and months it's like, oh, what am I? You get a little concerned, right? You're like, but you just got to know, you just got to keep going. That's it, man. That's literally the secret. So that was one thing. And then the second thing was I had such a awesome time with my parents that came out for my 100-miler.
Hmm.
I didn't realize how powerful that was going to be. They flew from Wisconsin, they came to Oregon, and they helped crew. And it was like so powerful having them and like my buddies that were pacing me. And it was just like, you finish a through hike or something, nobody's there around. They see pictures after it, but nobody's, it's just you or maybe your trail family. But having
Mhm.
my parents there was like so incredible. And I think for anybody doing an ultra, if you want a real easy burst of energy, have your parents or people that are real special to you come and be at your aids at the aid stations or crew you, and it's like it's such a good high. Like every time you come into the aid station, like that's what you're looking forward to, and it's a really good way to get energy when you might be down in those dumps. So, and I'm trying to think of anything else that I got from ultra running. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of other stuff, but like those are the two that really pop into my head.
And I love how you, it's both things I love there. I love how you talk about the low moments and the high moments, how we kind of undulate them, not just in ultras but in life, right? And you said it with your business as well. Like, and so
Oh
I think
yeah.
business, I consider the hardest endurance sport of all time, like even more than like 100 milers and everything. And to have that faith when things are hitting the fan that it's going to turn
Hmm.
around, I think is the key thing. And I love how you have that rule, like you don't quit in the low moments, because like that's like just so beautiful to know that, hey, I'm gonna have this turnaround. And even when you mentioned, I love like the adverse that you put on there saying at the high moments, if you're not feeling stoked, then maybe that is a good sign to deviate or to switch. And like I know people all
Hmm.
the time too, like been in an ultra and they're like, yeah, I was just kind of like doing well, but maybe I just wasn't excited about it. And maybe it's just not the type of race for you or anything like that.
Right.
Or so I love that you touch on that. And the second part about having loved ones there, man, it's just awesome. Like I hear the stories all the time of people with kids talk about seeing their kids there. And, I've had my fiance out at aid stations. Like you just get so stoked to get
Hmm.
there and see them and give that burst of energy, which is super, super cool to see, man. I love that. I'm curious for you too, like with the through hiking background into ultras, were there things from that through hiking background that helped you like in those ultras as well? Because I know some people listening don't have a through hiking. I personally don't have a through hiking background. I've done like a few fast pack adventures that have gotten miserable. Like I'm, for anyone listening, I'm not the person to listen to fast packing. Please, go to Chad for that. But I'm curious, like, were there things that led to your success from the through hiking world into ultras that maybe people who are just in ultra running aren't as familiar with?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not only just with the physicality, which one would be, you're hiking. Obviously, you're hiking with a pack on your back, and if you've ever seen, I think did you have Jeff Garmier on your?
Yeah.
So he's a big through hiker, right?
Yeah.
But he's crushing ultras too, and it's just really interesting to see because a lot of through hikers that I know, like they are so good at hiking uphill,
Mm-hmm.
basically the power hike in an
Mm-hmm.
ultra, but they're doing it with a pack on. So you get them in an ultra and they're just jamming those power hikes. maybe they aren't, if they hadn't trained running that much, maybe they're not that good at downhills or flats that fast, right? But the uphill, man, they can really crush that. It seems like with the power hiking and stuff. So that's one thing I think really what was big. And then the second thing I think, obviously it's a roller coaster on a freaking through hike too, man. And I had a guy that I met I did a section hike of the PCT, my first ever 100 miles section, right? And this is like my longest hike ever in 2019 or something. And I met this he was 70 years old and just crushing.
Wow.
And we would hike together, and he gave me he said this one phrase, and he just said, there's more good days than bad days on trail. And it's kind of another analogy relating to the roller coaster they go through with an ultra running, that just there's going to be those low moments. You just got to keep holding on. The weather's going to switch, or your mood's going to switch, or you'll see this, or you'll talk to this person or whatever. And so what's really interesting about through hiking though, is there's always these little serendipitous moments that you come upon all the time. And it's every time you are feeling low, you turn the corner and something happens to where there's trail magic, which is where people are feeding you, at a trail crossing, or you see a cool animal, or you see an awesome view, or you meet it's just, I don't know what it is, man, but every single time I've through hiked and have had a bad day, I swear it changes just like that. And so I've carried that into the ultra mentality as well. Now ultra it's way more intense period of time, right? It's more condensed, but yeah, essentially the same thing. So that's what I would say for that. Yeah.
So good. So good. That's such a good quote to say there's more good days on the trail than bad days, because you can feel like those bad days are going to last forever, right? It's I'm going to be here forever. But knowing that even in ultra, right, I feel like it can be translated into minutes or hours, right? There's more good hours than bad hours. To have that translation, super, super awesome to see. And you mentioned the serendipitous moments. I love that. Do you have any, either from your through hiking or from your ultra, that really had a deep impact on your life? I know meeting that guy in the PCT, which is awesome. First of all, 70 years old, freaking inspiring as is. Are there any other moments that you can think of that you maybe think of often, or ones that just kind of shape the way that you think, not just about endurance sports, but life, that, keep coming back to you?
Dude, there was actually one on the JMT, which was on the JMT. I was hiking northbound, and it was during COVID, so there was not a lot of people on trail at all. Nobody was going there. And so I wasn't seeing a lot of people. I was solo, of course, and I was running out of food. I did not have that many calories left. I was just burning through these calories. And I remember I was just at a real low point, man. I just wasn't hiking around people, and all of a sudden I'm just thinking about all this food that I have to ration now to get to the next resupply spot. Around the corner comes these 3 hikers, SOBOers, southbounders, and we just kind of start chatting, and they're like, "Oh, do you need any extra food?" I said, "Dude, yeah, that would be." So they hook me up with this extra food, and they're like, "Oh yeah, there's another guy that's coming behind us. He just resupplied out of MTR, and he's got all this extra food. You should hit him up." So that's what I did. I hiked a couple more miles. There he was, and he says, "Yeah, man." He gives me all this stuff, and I just think that this is great. And so I actually traded him some wild onions for it, because there's wild onions all over the JMT. So I had some wild onions for him, but that was really cool. And then a freaking couple more from the trail, it seems like, which was really interesting. There's this one part where I was on the Colorado Trail, and so let me back up. I was in the Oregon desert, so Central Oregon, and I was actually what's called shed hunting. So it's looking for antlers and stuff.
Oh, interesting.
And this was in 2021. So I'm looking for these antlers and stuff, and I'm like, no, this is in 2020. So I'm looking for these antlers, and I'm driving this back road, and out pops these two people out of nowhere, out of the woods, and they look like through hikers. They had the ULA backpack, they had ultras on, they had all this stuff. And I roll out, and I was like, "Hey, where you guys need to go, or what you guys up to?" And they're like, "Oh, we're hiking the Oregon Desert Trail, but I think we're gonna bail. Can you take us to the nearest town?" No problem. Put them in my car. We go all the way to this next town. We have a good time, chat it up, whatever. A year goes by. I'm on the Colorado Trail, and I get into Breckenridge. It's my first resupply, and I go, and I'm staying at this hostel that I booked. I go to open the door. I open up the door, and I look at this guy, and he looks at me. I'm like, did I pick you up in Oregon a year ago? He's like, oh
Get
my
out of here.
God, man. He's this older guy that just big triple crowner and all this stuff. And had not seen him, hadn't communicated with him, nothing since. So crazy, right? And then it was really cool because I was struggling on the CT at that time because I wasn't sleeping well at all. And so I get into that hostel that night, and I remember I was so stoked because I thought I was going to be able to sleep. It's going to be great. I was so stoked, man. I had this room to myself because the guy wasn't there yet. And all of a sudden at 9 p.m., this dude walks in, and I could tell he was going to snore. And that's what he did all night. So did Chad get any sleep? Chad did not get sleep. So I woke up, and I'm just in such a bad mood, man. And I have coffee with that guy who I picked up the year before. And he was kind of like that mentor on my first 100-mile hike where he was talking, a lot of philosophy around the trail. And it really pumped me up to go out and obviously complete the trail. And so just, those are two of them that popped straight into my mind right away. And as far as like ultras go, I'm trying to think with that, with ultras, I'm not sure if I have any actually, any serendipitous moments besides. Yeah, I don't know if I can think of any right now actually off the top of my head. Maybe one will come to me.
Yeah, no, but I love those moments that you mentioned. First of all, crazy that you met those people a year later in a completely different state. Like, that is just absolutely bananas. It's like super, the chances of that are nuts. I mean, is like the through hiking community like really that like close knit? Like, I'm not familiar.
People kind of say that. They say, don't talk shit about another through hiker because it's going to come around some way because it's such a tight community, and actually another serendipitous moment just popped in my head from from the CT, which was a little bit later on in the trail, and we're going through this section where it was very well known to be a very dirty water section, meaning cows everywhere. They're basically crapping in all the water sources. I mean, dude, there was cows everywhere.
Oh.
And I didn't really know about this because otherwise I would have brought a second filter too, filtered it twice. And I remember I'm filling up my water, and it had been raining the whole day. I mean, a whole day of rain. I'm just soaked. I'm just like filling up this water. I'm just like, oh, dude, this sucks, And I keep walking about another hour. And I look and I'm like, is that freaking trail magic down there? And I had just got to a point where these people pulled in on this trail, opened up their car, and were making burgers and stuff for people.
What?
And then they had clean water too. So I was able to swap out my water, get food. I was the only one there. It was raining still. They had a tent, and it was great. So it's just, man, I swear to God, like every single time I hit a low point, you just keep going, and there it is. Something appears magically out of somewhere. And I think as far as with my ultras, I think especially my 100, that was, after mile 50, it was just like pretty much a death march for me because like I was just like, oh my gosh, dude, like this is actually really after mile about 80 because I really kind of injured my tibias. Both of them were just really compromised, and so it was just, I need to get there fast, man, and finish this thing. But yeah, I'm looking forward to creating more serendipitous moments during these ultras. I think it's going to be a good time.
Yeah. Oh man. And I love how like the stories you shared are very much you're at a low moment and something good comes up. It's kind of like reinforcing that belief we've been talking about, like knowing something's good around the corner, which is super cool. And
yeah,
and I love how, you're looking for those in ultras as well too, because man, ultras can be tough. They could be, a grind, like as much as a through hike too. I mean, through hike, I mean, again, I've never been on one, but I can just imagine hearing through it. It's like, you're at an elongated period, like you're probably more times alone if you're going on it solo, which I know like you've done many times before. So man, like I think there's a lot of good lessons to kind of pull from there. And you do mention like the solo thing, which I'm kind of curious about. And I'm sure like having that notion that something good's going to happen, but like you're known, like I've seen a ton of your videos on YouTube, like you do a lot of these things solo, and this could be useful because I've been in ultras too, where I've ran for miles and miles and not seen anyone or anything like that, or even my first 100 miler, I never had a pacer. So which I
Ooh.
since have not done since, because pacers are great. But for those listening, like how do you deal with that, like that solo factor, right? Like how do you deal with that? Because like for me, that's like a big weight on my shoulders personally. I know for some other people it can really like start to get in your head a little bit. But when you're out there on the trail, how do you deal with being by yourself? Or is that just going on like a deeper level of like personal development? Like I'm super curious to hear how you deal with that.
Yeah. So in through hiking, I think that there's like two styles of going solo. And when you're doing these bigger trails, if you're doing something like the Colorado Trail or the John Muir Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail or anything like that, they're very social trails for the
Mm.
most part. You're passing a lot of people that are going your same direction or opposite directions. And so the opportunity to not feel as isolated is increased. And one of the reasons I love going solo on those types of trails is because of the fact that I'm not married to somebody on the trail, meaning if I go with somebody, a friend or something like that, and they have to get off the trail for whatever reason, they have to go to a wedding, they get hurt, they get whatever, right? I'm not married to that. I'm not committed to that, right? And so what I love about it is the fact that when I go solo, I can bounce around between people or trail
Mm.
families, and I make really good friends on trail, and I don't have to worry about anybody that maybe my friend's mileage is less than me or more than me or whatever, and worry about catching up to them. So what I try to do a lot on those more social trails is to find people or groups to link up with, and actually it's the same thing with an ultra run.
Mm.
One of my first objective with the 100 miler was to latch on to people to talk to, because
Mm.
it goes so much faster when you're
Yes.
talking to someone. It's just like having a pacer. I was literally like thinking them as my pacers for like the first 50. And I was like just feeding off of that. Like as long as I can make that, it's like it was my own personal podcast to listen to, because I would ask them questions. I would just keep them talking, and I do the same thing on the trail. And so that's how I really like to keep myself from getting lonely. It's not that you'd really get lonely on like an ultra so much as you would a through hike. With through hiking, if you're camping by yourself
Mm.
and you're going over passes by yourself, that can feel pretty isolating and lonely. And so that's what I like to do with that. Now, that being said, I did do the You Went to Highline Trail this year, and that
Oh
was
my
like
gosh.
5.5 days, and that was pretty much just me.
Yeah,
I mean, I
that's
didn't see
remote.
anybody. Yes, it was extremely remote, dude.
Oh my gosh.
And that I was going into that as more of a personal development thing
Mm.
also. Not that I didn't do it with those other solo hikes as well, because it was with that too, because I like just having that solo time. But this one was another level for me, because I did not see any day hikers, nobody coming the opposite way, certainly nobody going my way. And there were times, man, where if you watch the documentary, I'm like, man, I haven't seen anybody. It's kind of weird. It's so, it's interesting where your thoughts go. Your thoughts go a million miles a minute, but I always keep my phone open with my notepad, and I'll have like You Went to Highline Trail, and I'll have literally like all my thoughts, like like rattle them all off. So by the time I get back to my computer at home, I have ideas for content. I have, this person I want to text and say this to. Because, like, yeah, that's the weird thing, too, is like, oh, you start thinking about different people in your life. And you're like, oh, I wish I could really text this person and say this thing. But you can't because you don't have service. So you're like, oh, I'm going to, like, put this in there to remind me. So I had, like, a bunch of that and stuff. But for the most part, like, I really like, and this goes for ultras, too, is I love to use music and podcasts as tools.
Mm.
And, like, as performance enhancers for the
Mhm.
most part. So I won't start out the day on a trail listening to any of that, or I won't start out my ultra like that. I'll look at it as a carrot to have in the middle of the trail or the middle of the day that I'm looking forward to. That's giving me like my dopamine. I can hit a dopamine when I get it finally, and when I'm looking forward to it. And so those things really, really help me a lot. A real good key, though, for a through hike is to make sure you download a lot of songs for how long the frickin' thing is, because I was rotating the same 20 songs, bro.
Oh
And it
man.
was hell. And I thought like, and of course, all I had on my mind was these like 3 country songs that I had in this playlist. And every single pass that I would get up to, I would freaking take it off airplane mode. I'd raise it to the sky, try to get some service. Nothing, man.
Oh,
Same 20 songs. I was so sick of them, man. But so that's a really good lesson too. So
that
yeah,
is such a hallmark lesson because like some of these ultras are in super remote places, and even I've
totally.
I've gone on like a ultra race and I'd like go to pull up my music and I'm like, oh man, I have nothing downloaded. You have 0 bars, and you're like, oh well, I guess I'm listening to the music behind my ear or between my ears here, which
Oh
is
my gosh,
good tip
exactly.
for sure. I love that you mentioned the doing the Uinta trail like by yourself as a personal development thing. Like, tell me about that. Like, what were you looking to learn? Like, what did you learn? Like, and the reason why I asked this question for those listening is like I love when people explore endurance events to not just like be a better athlete or get accolades, but to be better people, right? And I think that's such an amazing thing that endurance gives us. So tell me about that experience. I'm curious to hear that and maybe some things you learned and I guess like the intentionality behind that because I think that's just such a cool thing that you set out to do something, first of all, really freaking hard because that is
Yeah.
notoriously a tough trail. And you knew
Hmm.
you were going to be out solo. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I was going. So I did that back in, was it July? And a couple months prior, I was going through a pretty interesting breakup.
Mm,
And so I wanted to, and I always do really really well by channeling that energy into something productive.
mm,
And typically it's something productive by myself because I really can just process everything in a really raw way with no distractions. Like you just said, no service. You are totally by yourself. You're just walking. Like I feel like all of my, and if you look at a lot of research too, I think Huberman Lab talks about this too. Is going for walks and things like. I think he with his zone 2 cardio, he'll get a lot of really good ideas and stuff. And it's like
mm,
because you're moving your body and something connection with the neurons and things like that. And so I was really interested to see what would happen with that by myself. And then I knew that it was going to be such an isolated trail, and it was during Utah's biggest snow year as well. And so I was
yeah.
really curious to see how the snow was going to be and how my snow skills were going to be that I've built up over the last couple years. Thankfully, I didn't really need anything like that. I brought micro spikes, never used them. There was some snow in the passes, nothing bad, but boy, the fear mongering was bad though. In the you went to Highline frickin' Facebook group, they're this and that or whatever, so crazy. But so the trail was interesting. Like I learned that for the most part, like I do enjoy my company, and I can. What's really interesting about solo hikes or solo runs or anything is like you're relying on yourself.
Mm,
With those social trails before, I knew that like probably around the corner somebody would come within an hour or two. With this, I had no freaking clue when anybody
mm,
would ever see me. I had an in reach and stuff, but I felt I had to do the problem solving. You can't rely on anybody else. It's you making the decisions. Where are you going to camp? Where are you going to sleep? Should you get water here? Should you get water there? What is this storm going to move in? So all these little micro decisions. And yeah, by the end of it, man, it was really interesting because I actually ended up the last night on trail. I was camping at a place called Dead Horse Lake, and it was right below Dead Horse Pass, which is supposed to be like the hardest pass of the Uinta Highline. And so I was like a little bit anxious about this. I didn't know how it would go. And actually, 2 through hikers that were hiking it rolled up to the camp. First time I'd seen any hikers going my way. And I'm like, holy shit, guys. And it was so cool. I realized, like, wow, like, this is awesome to have somebody else with, like, it was a huge energy boost. I realized that having people around me really was a big energy boost. So we ended up waking up that next morning. We hiked over the pass together. We basically hiked the rest of the day together. And then there was a time where we were about 3 miles from the finish, and we took a break. And I set my phone down. I was doing something. We ended up hiking again, kind of hiked up this hill. realized I forgot my phone. I said, "Hey, you guys just go ahead, whatever. I'll catch up to you or whatever." So like I ran down, grabbed my phone, hiked up again. And I get to the finish of the you went to Highline Trail. There's a little sign there. Fully expecting that they would be there as well. and they weren't there.
Oh,
And I was just like, "Damn, dude, that was kind of a slap in the face, man."
yeah.
But I was like, this is how it was supposed to be. I was supposed to hike this trail by myself. I was supposed to get over all these passes by myself, get through every obstacle and situation that was occurring by myself, and I was supposed to finish by myself. And so that's what I did. And so it was kind of like a slap in the face, but it was also like a lesson to me where you can fully 100% trust yourself, right? And like you can trust other people, like your circle that you have and stuff like that, but you need to 100% fully trust yourself and not ever rely like 100% on somebody else, because you never know what can happen, what they're thinking or whatever. And so it was a really interesting lesson for me and how it all wrapped up. But I wouldn't have had it any other way. I think it was pretty cool.
That's awesome, man. And I love that lesson because even like in ultras, right? Like I've heard stories of people who, crew someone else in an ultra and then like the crew's not there for whatever reason. They get a flat tire or they miss it or things like that. And like having that reliance on the other person can like totally just derail it if you don't kind of have that thing in
Totally.
there. So I love that lesson that you have in there. It's like not relying on people or like a pacer, like if they don't show up or like they bail at the last second, right? It doesn't like having that faith in yourself, like you kind of mentioned, that belief in yourself that you can do it. I feel like it's such a valuable skill, not just to have on the trails or, in a race, but just in life in general, right? Because life's freaking hard. Like we deal with challenges and having that deep belief in yourself, I feel like is a great tool to overcome any challenge that you're going through, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up about the pacer and an ultra too, because I remember watching a documentary, and there was this pretty high level gal. I think it was Western States. She
Hmm.
was running Western States, and she gets to this aid station, and she's supposed to pick up her crew was supposed to be there, and with food, like her certain food and a pacer, I think, and they weren't there, and she just freaking melted down, like
Hmm.
had a complete meltdown, ruined the entire race for her. And obviously I don't know what was going on in her head and stuff. There could have been other stuff, but that was a really interesting moment to me to see how much someone can unravel when something doesn't go their way with that, right? And it's actually kind of interesting too, because I was interviewing what's his name, Jupiter Hikes. He's a big through hiker. He's
Yeah.
done a lot of things like that. And I asked him once. I said, "What do you?" I said something about like he's always in such a good mood, right? And like, well, how the hell are you always in such a good mood on the trail? Like, what happens when something bad happens? And he says, "Well, I didn't sign up for this for it to be easy. The reason I went into this is for these challenges to come up." And it kind of takes me back to the quote of, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you, type of thing,
Hmm.
right? And so if you can look at it as it's going to be a positive, most short-term things that suck always end up to be a long-term benefit some way. It really does, if you're able to get through it and you're able to look at it in a different way. And so it's just interesting to me to see, or to think about that with ultra running too, because that would suck not
Hmm.
having your pacer there at night or
Hmm.
something. I mean, and you're thinking they're going to be there and you're like super stoked. I cannot imagine. Like, I probably would nosedive, dude. Like, talk about being down on the roller coaster. I think yeah, that'd be tough to get through for sure.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, man. And that's interesting you brought up that clip because it's like I've seen it happen before, like even just on the trail. And like, yeah, to your point, like I feel like it would be tough. I've never experienced it personally, but like I just know like how much of like a draw it is to be like, oh man, I'm gonna get my pacer here. It's gonna be amazing. And then like starting to think about like them not being there, and then all of a sudden like you're on this low point and you're just like what if, and
Oh,
all this, it's just like a whole spiral. So I love
yeah.
like that whole notion of just building this self-belief and self-sustainability, which is super powerful, man. I think that's awesome.
Right.
One thing that you also mentioned in that, and I've heard you talk about this before, and I've actually used this too in like my own content creation journey, is like writing things down as you kind of go, right? Like opening the notes app, putting stuff in there.
Oh,
I love
yeah.
how you're a big proponent of that, and I've actually used that, so thank you for that. But the reason why I asked this, that bring that up, is because I want to ask this question to you: is like, what's the value, whether or not someone is a content creator or not, right? Like, just the value of documenting your journey, right? Like, if you think there's like a value in it, whether you're creating content or not. Like, because for me, again, like, I'm in this content creator space, so I do it because I'm like, oh, I want to create content. And I know some people aren't as privy to it, but I think there's a value in documenting those kind of things. And obviously you're much better at it than I am, so I'd love to hear, like, what is the, like, for someone who doesn't current document their endurance journeys, I guess, to frame up the question nicely, like, why is there such a benefit to that, for someone listening who isn't doing this currently?
It is perhaps the most nostalgic thing that you could do,
Mm.
that just provides the same exact feelings and puts you in the same exact place that where you were when you were running or through hiking or whatever it was that you were doing. It puts you in the same, like, there's never been anything that I've been able to do besides watching my own videos back where I've edited it or whatever, or put it to music, or just, yeah, doing that stuff, and where I watch it back and I'm instantly put back into that place. Because I think we oftentimes, you run, first of all, you do something like that, like 100 miles or through hike, and it could be a blur. It can be like, it is chaos, right? Like total freaking chaos. And like, especially during a 100 mile or an ultra, like, you're not feeling the best. Like, you're not at your peak mental reserves, right? So where you can, you're enjoying everything for what it is, and you can remember everything because you're not sleeping the whole night too, and that's, it has to do with memory and all that type of stuff. So when you document it, it's literally like being there again. But
Mm.
watching it, like, now you're on the other side of it, you can appreciate it a lot more. Like, I bet you Sally, like, with that documentary, dude, she's gotta frickin' love that thing. I mean, that
Mhm.
was such a well put together documentary, and I hope more ultra runners will document it. I mean, it's got to be extremely hard to have a crew following you around like that, and it's still hard when you're doing it by yourself too. But
Mhm.
even if you just have a frickin' GoPro. Actually, I don't like GoPros, so I'm not even going to say GoPro. GoPro has failed me so many times. I finally switched to an Insta360, and I love it.
Nice.
So, and I'm not sponsored by either one of them, but I just love it. And so, even if you're just bringing that and recording your thoughts and stuff like that, because you're just in such a different state of mind than when you're in your air conditioned couch watching it totally comfortable. It's two different, it's like almost two different realities in a way. And so documenting it has been one of my favorite things to do, to relive something and show people, like, what it was like, essentially. Yeah.
So good. Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because there have been times where, like, I'm on the plane or like wherever, and I'm just like scrolling through like my photos, and it's like the ones that of, like, my last 100-mile race or things like that. It just brings you back to that moment. And I think one of my biggest personal regrets is, like, I did my first 100-miler, and I didn't take any pictures. I took like one video like the entire time, and, like, to your point, it was such a blur to me. Like, I
Yeah.
remember the race, but like there's so many things that, like, I don't. It's not that I don't recall it. It's just like it's hard for me to like really be in that moment again, because you're in just this like intense state. Like, you're kind of in this like survival mode. And so, like, I'm so glad that you said
Right.
that, because, like, I wish I like documented more of it and had it out there and everything, because it is something you can like go back on and get good insights. I even love how you mentioned just taking out and just like recording your thoughts, like talking through those things. Cause I've been in those
Mm-hmm.
states of inspiration and just amazing stuff. And then I get back and I sit down and I like get to work, and I'm just like, shit, like, what? I
What
know
I
I had an
say?
amazing thought. What the hell was it? Like, what? And like you
Oh,
start
it's
like
the
thinking, like,
worst.
where the heck is it?
Yeah. And because here's the thing, man, is it takes a lot of work to get to that thought in the first place. Like, if you have that thought at mile 70, you may never have that thought again,
Yeah.
because you are in such a different state of mind than in regular life. And it's a privilege to get to mile 7. It's a privilege to hurt that bad and be able to have a body that hurts that bad. But to get to that point, it takes a lot of work, man. So if you don't get that, and I've been there too, you don't record the thought and it's gone like forever, you know what I mean? And so, but for people that are listening, they're probably like, well, I'm just trying to finish my 100. Like, screw documenting it. Because I was a little bit like that with my 100 too. I didn't record too much. Thankfully, though, I had people like either my pacers recording or my parents recording. So I had a lot of videos in that way. With the 100, though, I was a little bit like, okay, first of all, I don't know if I can finish this. So maybe I don't try to introduce a camera into this to make it even more complicated. But like to your point, I wish I would have done a little bit more. With my through hikes and stuff, it comes naturally to me and stuff because and it's really interesting because with through hikes, it's really fun because you're looking at things in a different light. The way like either maybe you want to get up early to catch the sunset or the sunrise rather for your video, and you get to experience that, or you see the way the light's reflecting off of this flower or something. And so you stop and you record that. Whereas most people would just simply walk past it. And so you're like on a micro level, you're really like, it gives you a different view of the trail and of nature and things like that. And at least for rim to rim to rim, when we run that in the next few weeks here, I'm just going to bring my Insta and record like that. But as far as like being real cinematic, like my documentaries, like my through hikes, like that's going to be out the window. Cause like first is like, I just need to finish it in good health. Right. That's first things first. And the documentation will be kind of icing on the cake for me for the real long endurance things anyway. So
yeah, no, I love that, man. I love that. And I think it's so cool how you place the emphasis on like, it doesn't have to be this whole like cinematic thing. Like you literally just sometimes, and it's awesome that you mentioned that because there's times where I posted pictures and it's just super blurry and it's just chaos. And people are like, I love this because like, it just captures like the rawness. And it's like, it's just super cool to see like you, like who's a, established content creator say it doesn't have to be this whole cinematic experience. Like you're just going out and recording it. And that's like amazing too. And I love that you're doing rim to rim to rim, which is just awesome. And I've done it before. It's incredible. How are you? Yeah, dude, yeah, it is, man. So I live in Arizona, so it's like right in my backyard, which is awesome.
Okay.
But that's the adventure of a lifetime. I'm curious, like, how are you preparing for it? How are you training for it? Like, cause it is one of the best experiences I think any endurance athlete can have. So I'm stoked that you're
really.
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude. Yeah, it is amazing. Like for sure. So I'm curious, like how are you preparing for it? Cause I know a lot of people listening, they get interested in it or maybe just interested in their own kind of endurance challenges, but what's that preparation looking like for 50 miles in the Grand Canyon?
Well, first of all, that really stokes me up, man. Like I'm super stoked. I've been to the Grand Canyon one time and I can legitimately tell you that was the first time in my life where my actual breath got taken away, was seeing the Grand Canyon. And I was just at like the South Rim or whatever we were at. I just couldn't believe it. And so now to be running down into that years later is going to be such a trip.
Yeah.
But as far as training goes, yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting, man. I think so. I didn't have it really on my list for this year until I was kind of thinking I gotta close summer out with something rad. And I've been doing a bunch of Colorado 14ers this year, so a lot of time on feet. I paced a 100-miler for a buddy at Leadville, which was awesome, and did my through hikes and stuff. And so my legs are in good shape, but now I'm like doing a little bit more trail running with vert. And so I just did 25 the other day up in Colorado. And so thankfully that's kind of at 10, 11,000 feet of elevation. And I live at 7,200 feet here too. And so I'm hoping that'll, being on all these 14ers and doing all that time on feet will help me a lot. But yeah, so for the most part, like I think we're going to hit a 31 mile day this weekend with a buddy.
Nice.
And then I'm going to taper for the next 2 weeks and then run it October 14. So that's kind of my plan. I've been doing a little bit more actual running mileage the last few weeks. But honestly, man, sometimes I feel like with runs like that, just knowing that you can do it because you've done similar things to that is such a big like confidence boost. Not that I'm like 100% confident in it, but I like know that like I can, if push comes to shove, like I'll be able to like death march it in
Mhm.
some way, somehow, as long as I don't get like bit by a scorpion or some shit or like break my ankle, right? But so I know that it'll probably be a pretty big sufferfest because contrary to what a lot of people think, like running's okay, but it's not like I love running. I do it because it's such a big challenge to me
Mhm.
because it doesn't, I mean, I enjoy it after it's done, and I enjoy it for the most part while I'm doing it, and I love trail running in the mountains. I almost think trail running in the mountains is a superpower
Mhm.
because you do these Colorado 14ers and you're running or power hiking up, running down, and you're just done in half the time that people are hiking them. So now you have time to do all this other stuff, and so I think it's such a good tool in the toolbox to have for me, and learning about nutrition and how that fuels your body and things like that. But for the most part, running for me comes hard. It comes hard sometimes. It's like it's hard for me to get out the door, but I think that's why I like it so much because it's such a challenge.
I love that,
Yeah.
man. I think it's so
Yeah.
great because like it's and you hear guys like Goggins say the same thing. It's like he says like I don't like running, like it's not something I love, but it's the challenge. And I think that makes it I
Yeah.
think even more respectable for me than someone who's like super passionate about running because it's like you're doing it in the sense to level yourself up and be a better person, right? Like I think
Hmm.
it's that embracing the challenge, which is so awesome. And even diving into things like rim to rim that are like exceptionally hard and challenging, but like knowing that it's going to require you to be a next level of yourself, I think is just so awesome, man, and just super
Right.
cool to see. So I love that, man. And like is that like I know you mentioned like you're like when you're thinking about endurance challenges, right? Like maybe it's something that isn't something you like in general or anything like that. So are you always looking for that thing that kind of like is it like a balance between things you like and don't like I guess like and you've done tons of different hikes and everything, so when you're thinking about where to dive in next, like whether it is ultra or just personal life or business, right? I know you mentioned you quit your job, which that's a
Hmm.
big challenge on its own. How do you pick your next challenge in life to help you
Mm.
find the fulfillment that you're looking for, not just as an athlete but as a person?
Mm. Wow. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but that you pretty much nailed. That is kind of what I'm always doing because I never, and I think all of us ultra runners, we don't really have that complacent bone in our body. A lot of
Hmm.
times we're always searching for the next thing, and we just have that type of personality which I get for the most part, isn't the normal way of thinking and stuff. I mean, now that I have a bunch of friends that are in it, now it does seem very, isn't that crazy? Like you get a bunch of ultra friends or like friends that do the same stuff you do, and it doesn't become, it becomes normal and the status quo. And now like when people are thinking that it's crazy, you're just like, no, you're crazy, dude. Like, cause for the longest time, I thought I was nuts. I thought I was nuts until I found my people, man, for real. And so, but yeah. So as far as challenges for me, what it's really coming down to is like there's two things. One is business, and that's been new for this year, is growing the business, and that's honestly what this year was. I was more focused on than adventures. Although I still did a lot of adventures, but I was really focused on the business. But going forward, what I'm looking forward to is combining everything that I've learned in the outdoors into these single experiences. So next year, hopefully, we're planning on doing Denali.
Oh,
So in
nice.
my head, that's, you have the camping, you have the nutrition, you have the endurance stuff, you have mountaineering, you have crampons, you have rope work, you have all of this stuff that I've been learning the last few years that now kind of culminates into one expedition. And that's super alluring to me, like that alpine climbing type of stuff. Because you combine everything. You have to know how to spend all day on your feet, just like an ultra. You have to know how to fuel your body, just like an ultra. You have to know how to climb and scramble and ropes and all this stuff that combines everything. And so that's what's super alluring to me and kind of where I see the direction of where my life goes. But also sprinkling in, like, I want to do the long trail next year, through hike
Mm.
that. And after watching frickin' Sally's documentary, I wrote in my journal, I was like, well, there it goes. I'm probably going to run another 100, I think. I mean, probably not the Cocodona 250, but frickin' A, man, that was such a good documentary. I was super inspired. And so I always got to be careful watching inspirational stuff like that. I love it. I love watching that stuff. There's always stuff I'll watch is like inspirational stuff. And I just get done with it. And I'm like, dang it. There's another thing I got to write down, And so that was super cool. But yeah, hopefully that does that answer your question, kind of where I was going?
Yeah, 100%, man. I love how, it sounds like you just embrace the things that inspire you and motivate you and things that are like super hard. And I love how you even mentioned, talking about the different priorities. Cause I've had on a few guests who say something similar, right? You're like, hey, I'm more focused on running the business this year than adventuring. And like, that's like so cool to me, man. Like, I love that because, whether it is business or anyone listening to the podcast, whether it's like family or something like that, it's like, doesn't always have to be this like linear progression, or I should say like balanced progression, or every year has to be the same of like what you put your priorities in. It's like some years can be your ultra years. Some years can be the years you focus on your business. Some can be the years you focus on your family a lot more. Right. So it's like pick and choosing. There's never a right or wrong answer, right? If you want to focus on you, like go ahead. If you want to focus on running, go ahead. I think it's like that conscious choosing of like, this is what my priority is. And I'm okay with that. And like, I think that is one of the most important skills, not only endurance athletes can learn, but like just people in general. It's like when you prioritize your values, you live that fulfilling life, right? And you do it in a way that challenges you. Like, man, like that's the recipe for fulfillment. And I get that in, the way you show up, not just on this podcast, but how you show up to your audience and everything like that, man. It's just, I get that in everything. So it definitely comes through for sure.
No, I love that. And yes, like every year, I love what you said. Every year does not need to be like a total linear progression, whatever it is that you're doing, right? What's important to me is that when I look back on the year, I want it to be such a dramatic change from whatever it is, whatever my goals were or whatever, that when I see when I remember what I was doing in January to now it's December, and I think about everything in between and what it's done for me, that's the most important thing to me, because I feel like if you are the same person, at least for me, if I am the same exact person I was January 1 to December 31, I fucked up. And that's something and that to me would be, for me, myself, is like being complacent. Like I did not have a direction. I was not, and thankfully that has not happened to me for many, many years, because I've been very adamant with planning goals and breaking them down into sub goals and monthly and weekly, and stuff like that. And so by the time it's just like making videos, you look at your videos from, at least I look at my videos from 6 months ago and I'm still like, wow, that was ugly. You're always like progressing. And so if I am ever not progressing, I think that's where, for me, I get into a bad headspace. And so progression to me and building to me is where I feel the happiest. And I get pushback on that from prior people in my life that were, well, you can never just settle down. I'm sure you've got this. You can never just sit down. You can never just settle down, or you get so obsessed with this. And again, I used to think that there was something wrong with me, man, until I read this book called Relentless by Tim Grover. Yeah, one of my favorite. You've read it?
So good, dude. So good. That book makes me want to like run through a wall every time I like have to read it, dude. I just get so fired up.
Bro, I was doing like freaking core, and I was doing like 2-a-day workouts for like months after reading that book at 5:15 in the morning. I was so jacked up, bro. You're so right.
So good.
But that was the book that changed my view on that whole thing. And I thought, dude, like I've never read anything or talked to anybody that had that same mentality. And I was like, holy crap. And then, so once I started embracing it, then I started attracting more people into my life that had that exact mentality. And again, like I said earlier in the podcast, it was normal. It was normalized. And so I don't know where I was going with that whole thing, but anyway, yeah, good book. Good book if anybody's looking for a book to run through a wall with.
Yeah, 100%, man. First of all, yes, I agree. That book is just incredible. And I love how you mentioned just the value of like understanding that it's okay to be that, like, because a lot of the times, right, there's that, like you said it, like you get that pushback from people saying like, oh, you're never satisfied and everything like that, but I think that's an okay thing. Like it's a good thing. It drives you like to not have this satiated hunger all the time, because like that pushes you to do more, right? It says it in the book, like you have to be relentless and it's okay to do that. And I love how you know, started to attract people who feel that same thing. And like you said it earlier in the podcast, like it can, when people say like, oh, like you're running like 50 miles, like it's the people you're hanging around with. It's no longer like, oh, that's crazy. Like I won't
No,
even drive that far. It's, wow, that's
exactly.
awesome, man. Like super
Dude,
cool. Right. Like, and it's like shit. Like I'm not going crazy. Like I found,
yeah.
you know, my people. And like, I think like having that community around you, like, which I'm sure, you know, in the through hiking community and ultra community, just makes you just not feel crazy and doubt yourself and builds that
No.
self-belief, man. So everything's like coming full circle here at the end, which is like super freaking cool.
Yes. Yeah, I love that you said I won't even drive that far. I don't know
No.
how many freaking
Oh,
times I've heard that one, dude.
dude, it's every time I hear that, I want to just like, oh man,
I
just I
know.
don't even know. I roll my eyes like internally as much as possible. It is like the bane of my existence. So if anyone listening wants to really like upset Joe, like just say that to me every time I say my long run.
Shoot him a DM, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even drive that far. Man, dude, this has been so freaking awesome, Chad. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this conversation. I love hearing about your journey, your insights. I mean, it's just super freaking cool. For anyone here who wants to follow along Chad, please do. I'm putting a link to his socials and YouTube channel and everything that he has in the show notes. Please follow along. Like his stuff is amazing. If you are interested in being a content creator too in the outdoor space, Chad is a guy who's got my stamp of approval by far. I mean, I've learned tons of tips on his
Appreciate it.
Instagram for free too, but he's also got an amazing program out that you can enroll into in his bio as well, which I'll be enrolling in. I told him that too as well. And so I'm excited to be a part of that. So please dive into Chad resources. If you are a content creator, endurance athlete, all the above, it's in the show notes for sure. And Chad, for my last question on here on the Everyday Ultra podcast, and this is a question that I ask all the guests, and because the show is called Everyday Ultra, it's rooted in the ethos of the show. And that question is, what can our listeners do every single day to be better endurance athletes?
Better. Okay. The first thing that popped into my head, cold showers in the morning
Oh, I
right
was not
away.
expecting that.
I know. I know. Here's why. Because I feel like it does relate to endurance, number one, because you have to get comfortable with that getting up and doing that no matter what day it is, how cold it is in your house, or what you have to do in the morning. Getting in that thing and just doing it. I only do it for a minute and a half, but it wakes you up, and B, it really does help with, like, I believe in the inflammation and all of that, and it just sets your day out right when you get the hardest thing done, or one of the, it's only a minute and a half, so it's subjective, but you get that done first thing in the morning. You don't need a cup of coffee for a while because your adrenaline's going from that, and it just starts the day off right. So that would be my answer to that.
Oh man, well I am like, so anytime I've taken a cold shower, I mean a minute and a half, right? Sounds short. That's like an eternity in a cold shower. Like that
Yeah.
is a
Mm-hmm.
long time. But I
Yeah.
love how you link it to endurance, because it is. It's like you're enduring something hard. Your senses are heightened. Like, I mean, I've been in cold water before where you just start like breathing, like, and you have to get to this place where you have to
Be
basically
cool.
get control of your mind, right? Like Wim Hof talks about it all the time. Like he's a great example of it. And so I love that answer. And now you have my word. I'm going to take a cold shower tomorrow morning. And
Let's go, Joe. I'm gonna send you a DM to check.
oh man, I might curse you out like for like the first like 5 seconds or something, but I know I'll be thanking you at the end of it for sure.
Let's go, baby. Yes, I love it. Short-term pain, long-term gain, baby. That's
Hey,
right.
you said it. You
Yeah.
said that earlier in the podcast.
Yeah.
Like the things that have
Yeah.
short-term pain lead to the long-term
Yeah.
happiness and fulfillment, man. So I know it's the same with not only cold showers, but endurance challenges, content
Totally.
creation, everything, man. And like I said before, you're a living, breathing example of it all, my friend. So thank you for coming on the show, for being you. And dude, I'm excited to see you take on rim to rim to rim, man. It's gonna be freaking awesome.
Well, Joe, thank you very much. This is one of my favorite podcasts that I've ever done. So you were a outstanding host, my friend. I learned a lot being a podcast host as well from you that I'm going to be stealing to put into my podcast now because you did such an outstanding job with this. So again, thank you very much for the invitation, and I feel grateful to be here. Thank you.
Testing, testing, testing.